The California sun blazed mercilessly over Edwards Air Force Base, casting long shadows across the desert tarmac. Dust devils danced in the distance while the roar of jet engines echoed through the valley. For Captain Olivia Martinez, this was paradise, a chance to prove herself among the military's finest test pilots. But she never imagined that a weathered old aircraft with peeling paint would change everything she thought she knew about aviation history, or that her mockery of this flying museum piece would lead to an investigation that would uncover presidential secrets buried for 30 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. All right, people, Olivia called out to her squadron, wiping sweat from her brow as she supervised the afternoon training session. At 29 years old, fresh from her second deployment and with a master's degree in aeronautical engineering, she took pride in running the tightest fighter training program on base. Her pilots respected her, her flight scores were legendary, and her confidence was bulletproof. "Today we're testing your precision flying through the Sierra course." She gestured toward the training route mapped on the digital display. "Standard qualification run, but I've set up something special for you." The course included 3 particularly challenging maneuvers designed to test even experienced pilots. Complete all 3 with perfect scores and you earn weekend passes. Fail and you're in the simulator until Sunday. The pilots cheered, already placing bets on who would succeed. Among them, Lieutenant Ryan Jackson, the squadron's natural comedian, was entertaining everyone with his impressions of their commanding officers. Lieutenant Madison Taylor, the unit's tech specialist, was calculating wind speeds on her tablet, while Lieutenant Noah Wilson, barely 23 but with natural flying instincts, was already visualizing his approach. That's when she appeared. A small woman in her 60s walked slowly toward the flight line, her slight frame almost swallowed by a faded flight jacket that had seen better decades. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she approached what looked like a museum piece, an ancient F-4 Phantom jet, its paint chipped and worn, sitting forlornly at the edge of the tarmac. Ryan was the first to notice her. "Hey, Captain," he called out, barely containing his laughter. "I think someone's grandmother got lost looking for the aviation museum tour." The woman approached the security barrier, her weathered hands gripping a helmet with surprising steadiness. She moved with the careful gait of someone who'd learned to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible in a world that hadn't always welcomed her presence. Olivia strode over, her military bearing automatic. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this is a restricted military training area. Civilians aren't permitted without proper clearance and escort." She looked up at Olivia with quiet blue eyes that held depths she couldn't quite read. "I just want to fly one pattern," she said simply. "It's been a long time since I've been in a cockpit." The pilots had gathered closer now, their conversation dying down as they took in this unexpected interruption. Ryan couldn't help himself. "Bet she learned to fly at the county fair," he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. "Hope she doesn't throw out her hip climbing into that old heap." "Maybe we should call the base medic," Madison joined in, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Wouldn't want her to strain something in that antique." The woman said nothing, but Olivia noticed something in her posture shift almost imperceptibly. The way she held the helmet wasn't quite right for a civilian. Too natural, too practiced. But her appearance was so unassuming, so ordinary, that Olivia dismissed the thought. "Ma'am, I understand your interest, but we have strict protocols. This airspace is for military personnel only. I'm going to have to ask you to..." "One flight pattern," she repeated. And there was something in her voice, not pleading, not demanding, but certain. "Then I'll leave." Noah, the youngest pilot, felt something odd about the situation. There was something in the woman's stance, in the way she held that helmet, that didn't match her grandmotherly appearance. But he kept his observations to himself. Ryan, however, was on a roll. "Tell you what, lady," he called out, his voice carrying across the tarmac. "If you can even start up that ancient bird, I'll clean everyone's gear for a month. Hell, I'll volunteer for extra duty too." The other pilots laughed, the tension breaking as they saw this as entertainment rather than disruption. Even Olivia found herself smiling. What harm could there be in letting an old woman sit in a decommissioned fighter? It might even be good for morale, a harmless diversion before they got back to serious training. "All right," Olivia said, making a decision she'd later question. "One pattern. But you'll need to follow all safety protocols, and this aircraft hasn't been certified for flight in years. You can sit in it, but the engines stay off." To her surprise, the woman produced documentation from her jacket pocket. The F-4 was certified last month. Special historical project. The papers appeared legitimate, with all the proper stamps and signatures. As the woman walked toward the aircraft, the laughter from the pilots gradually died down. Something about her demeanor had changed. The hunched shoulders straightened slightly. Her breathing became controlled, measured. The way she approached the fighter was no longer that of an elderly civilian playing with jets. It was something else entirely. The F-4 Phantom sat on the tarmac, a relic from a bygone era of aviation. First introduced in the 1960s, it had served as the backbone of American air power through Vietnam and beyond. This particular aircraft looked especially weathered. Its paint faded unevenly, patches visible along the fuselage. To Olivia's trained eye, it seemed barely airworthy, certainly nothing compared to the sleek F-35s her squadron flew. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The woman climbed into the cockpit with practiced ease, no hesitation in her movements. Olivia noticed that she didn't need to check where any of the controls were. Her hands moved automatically to the right positions, adjusting settings with the muscle memory of someone intimately familiar with this aircraft. "Ma'am, just to be clear, this is an observation only. Power up systems if you want, but this aircraft stays on the ground," Olivia called up to her, suddenly feeling a twinge of uncertainty about the whole situation. The woman nodded, but there was something in her eyes that made Olivia suspect she had her own plans. As the canopy lowered, Olivia stepped back, watching with growing concern as the ancient jet's systems began to come alive. Lights flickered on the console, and to everyone's surprise, the engines began their startup sequence with a whine that quickly built to a roar. "Is she actually starting that thing?" Madison asked, her mocking tone replaced by disbelief. "Captain, those engines shouldn't even work," Ryan added, the humor gone from his voice. Before Olivia could respond, before she could call security or ground crews, the F-4 was taxiing toward the runway with a confidence that spoke of thousands of hours in the cockpit. Olivia grabbed her radio. "Tower, this is Captain Martinez. We have an unauthorized takeoff on runway 3. I repeat, unauthorized takeoff." The calm voice of the air traffic controller responded, "Captain, that aircraft has clearance. Special authorization from Andrews. Code Sierra Alpha November Delta." Olivia felt her stomach drop. Sierra Alpha November Delta was a presidential authorization code. What was going on? The F-4 accelerated down the runway, its ancient frame shuddering under the power of engines that somehow performed like they were fresh from the factory. It lifted off with a grace that belied its age, climbing into the California sky with precision that even Olivia had to admire. "Tower, request explanation on that authorization," Olivia demanded. "Can't help you, Captain. Orders from above. Suggest you observe the pattern." Olivia and her pilot stood in stunned silence as the elderly woman piloted the ancient fighter through maneuvers that should have been impossible for both the aircraft and someone of her apparent age and frailty. The F-4 executed rolls, high-G turns, and precision approaches that even the most advanced modern fighters would struggle to match. "That's not possible," Madison whispered, her tablet forgotten in her hands. "The stress tolerances on that airframe. It shouldn't hold together." Noah was watching with intense focus, his mind calculating what he was witnessing. "Captain, she's flying that jet like it was built yesterday, but she's also flying it like nobody flies anymore. Those are old-school techniques, Vietnam-era combat maneuvers that aren't even taught now." As they watched, the woman brought the F-4 through an approach that lined up perfectly with Olivia's Sierra training course. What happened next would haunt Olivia's dreams and launch an investigation that would uncover secrets buried for decades. The F-4 executed each of the 3 challenge maneuvers with a precision that made Olivia's demonstrations look amateurish by comparison. The old fighter danced through the sky, performing feats that modern flight computers deemed impossible. The final maneuver, a complex combination of roll, dive, and pull-up that tested the limits of both aircraft and pilot, was executed with such perfection that even Ryan was left speechless. The pattern complete, the F-4 lined up for landing, touching down with a gentleness that spoke of extraordinary skill. As it taxied back to its original position, the pilots stood in complete silence, their earlier mockery replaced by confusion and awe. The woman climbed down from the cockpit with the same careful movements, showing no signs of the incredible physical strain the high-G maneuvers should have caused. She removed her helmet, her graying hair now windblown, and approached Olivia with those same quiet blue eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, handing over a small logbook. "I'll leave now." As she turned to walk away, Noah found his voice. "Ma'am," he called out, his words barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the stunned silence. How was that even possible? That aircraft shouldn't be able to perform like that." She paused without turning around. "Some things you learn when lives depend on it," she said quietly. Then she continued walking, her figure growing smaller against the desert landscape until she disappeared entirely. Olivia stood frozen, staring at the ancient F-4 that shouldn't have been able to fly like that. Around her, her pilots were beginning to whisper among themselves, their voices filled with awe and confusion. Ryan was the first to break the spell. "Captain," he said, his usual joking tone replaced by something approaching reverence. "Who the hell was that?" Olivia had no answer, but as she watched the desert where the mysterious woman had vanished, she felt the first stirring of suspicion that would eventually unravel one of the military's most carefully guarded secrets. The afternoon training session was forgotten. The pilots stood in small groups, discussing what they'd witnessed, their voices hushed as if they were afraid speaking too loudly might make the impossible flight disappear from reality. And somewhere in the back of Noah's mind, a single word whispered itself with growing certainty: legend. The officers' club buzzed with excited chatter that evening, but Olivia Martinez found herself picking at her food, her mind replaying the afternoon's events. Around her, her pilots were regaling anyone who'd listen with increasingly dramatic versions of what they'd witnessed. "I'm telling you, it defied physics," Madison was saying to a table of skeptical maintenance officers. "That F-4 pulled maneuvers that would rip the wings off a modern fighter. I've got it all calculated on my tablet. The stress tolerances alone should have been impossible." Ryan, never one to be outdone, added his own embellishments. "The woman had to be at least 60, maybe 70, climbing into this ancient fighter that looked like it belonged in a museum. But when she took off," he made a dramatic gesture with his hands, "it was like watching magic." Noah sat quietly in the corner, his meal untouched. Unlike the others, he wasn't interested in turning the incident into entertainment. Something about the woman's demeanor, the way she'd carried herself, wouldn't leave his mind. He'd grown up around military bases, had learned to read people, and everything about her had screamed, "trained professional," despite her grandmotherly appearance. Colonel William Harrison, the base's senior training officer, overheard the commotion and approached their table with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "All right, what's this nonsense I keep hearing about some civilian woman performing aerial acrobatics in a museum piece?" Olivia looked up from her tray. "Sir, I know how it sounds, but Martinez, you're telling me you allowed an unauthorized civilian onto a restricted flight line?" Harrison's voice carried the edge of someone who was rapidly losing patience. "And then let her fly weapons-grade aircraft?" "Sir, it was just one pattern, and I verified her documentation." It seemed legitimate. One pattern that apparently violated the laws of aerodynamics. Harrison shook his head. "Martinez, I'm disappointed. I thought you had better judgment than to let your pilots' imaginations run wild with some old lady's joyride." Ryan tried to interject. "Colonel, with all due respect, we all saw what we saw." Harrison cut him off. "What you saw was an old F-4 being put through some basic maneuvers. Maybe it was better maintained than it looked. Maybe she got lucky with some thermals. But fighters don't perform beyond their design specifications. And 60-year-old women don't suddenly develop the physical resilience to pull high-G maneuvers." He fixed Olivia with a stern look. "Captain Martinez, report to my office first thing tomorrow. We need to discuss proper flight line security protocols." As Harrison walked away, the pilots exchanged frustrated looks. The excitement of the afternoon was rapidly being replaced by the sting of dismissal and mockery. "Nobody believes us," Madison muttered, staring at her calculations. "They think we're making it up, or that we're too stupid to know what we saw." What if we're not the first people to see something like this? Noah finally spoke up. The others turned to look at him. What do you mean? Olivia asked. I mean, what if this wasn't random? What if she came to our base specifically? Noah pulled out his phone and began typing. I'm going to do some research. There's something about this whole situation that doesn't add up. Over the next few days, the mockery intensified. Word of the magic flying grandma spread throughout the base, but not in the way the witnesses had hoped. Instead of curiosity or investigation, they were met with eye rolls and jokes about gullible pilots who couldn't tell the difference between skill and luck. Major James Cooper, a veteran instructor known for his harsh training methods, made a point of stopping by Olivia's briefing room every afternoon. Martinez, I hear you're running fantasy flight school now instead of real training. Maybe we should add unicorns to the target lineup next. The ribbing became relentless. In the hangars, other squadrons would make exaggerated flying gestures whenever Olivia's pilots walked by. Watch out, boys. Here come the ghost hunters, became a common greeting. General Patricia Donnelly, the base commander, even addressed the incident during a staff meeting, though Olivia only heard about it secondhand. Apparently, she'd used it as an example of why proper flight line security was essential, warning other officers about the dangers of letting local aviation enthusiasts disrupt military training. The worst part wasn't the mockery from their peers. It was the growing doubt among Olivia's own pilots. As days passed without any evidence to support their claims, some began to question what they'd actually seen. Maybe it was just a really well-maintained F-4, Madison admitted one evening, her tablet closed for once. I mean, the calculations are technically possible, just highly improbable. Highly improbable is an understatement, Ryan replied. Maybe we all saw what we wanted to see. You know how it is sometimes. When you're expecting something amazing, your brain fills in the gaps. Olivia felt her authority slipping. The pilots who had once looked up to her were now second-guessing not just the incident, but her judgment in general. If she could be fooled by some old woman's lucky flight, what else might she be wrong about? Only Noah remained unconvinced by the official dismissal. Every evening he spent hours on his laptop, digging through military forums, historical records, and classified databases he probably shouldn't have had access to. His military ID gave him clearance to certain archives, and he was determined to find answers. You're obsessing, Ryan told him one night, finding Noah hunched over his computer at 2 a.m. Maybe it's time to let this go. I can't, Noah replied without looking up. There's something here. I can feel it. Feel what? That we got pranked by someone's grandmother? Noah turned to face him. Ryan, I've been around fighters my whole life. My mom was Air Force, my dad was a Navy pilot. I know what skilled flying looks like, and what I saw wasn't luck. So what are you saying? That some random old lady is secretly a super pilot? I'm saying that maybe she wasn't random. Noah turned back to his computer. And maybe she wasn't just some old lady. The breaking point came during a training exercise the following week. Colonel Harrison had arranged for a demonstration by the base's top fighter pilots, a way to show Olivia's squadron what real precision flying looked like. The demonstration went flawlessly, with each pilot executing their maneuvers with textbook accuracy. As the pilots applauded, Harrison made his point clear. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just witnessed is the result of years of training, proper technique, and military discipline. This is how exceptional flying is actually accomplished, not through fairy tales and magical aircraft. The implied criticism stung. Olivia felt her face burning, as other instructors nodded knowingly. Her pilots looked embarrassed, and she couldn't blame them. But as they walked back to the briefing room, Noah pulled Olivia aside. Captain, I found something. Can we talk privately? In Olivia's office, Noah opened his laptop and pulled up a scanned document. I've been digging through old mission reports, cross-referencing unusual aerial incidents. Look at this. The document was heavily redacted, but Olivia could make out enough to understand it was from a classified operation during the Gulf War, dated 1991. Several sections mentioned unprecedented aerial techniques and advanced maneuver methodology demonstrating tactical application beyond established parameters. Noah, where did you get this? You could get court-martialed for accessing classified materials. Captain, look at this photo. Noah clicked to another page. where a partially visible image showed a female pilot standing in front of an F-4 Phantom. Most of her face was blacked out, but what remained visible showed sharp, focused eyes that looked eerily familiar. Olivia felt her stomach drop. Those eyes. The operation was called Sandstorm, and the squadron was designated Spectre Wing, all-female fighter pilot unit. And look at this. Noah highlighted a line in the report. Team leader demonstrated ability to execute aerial maneuvers through envelope-exceeding techniques previously considered theoretical. Noah, this proves nothing. Even if this is real, it could be anyone. Captain. Noah's voice was quiet but certain. The team leader's call sign was Phantom Queen, and according to this report, she was declared KIA in 1991. But what if she wasn't? Olivia stared at the document, her mind racing. The implications were staggering. If Noah was right, if the woman who'd visited their base was somehow connected to this legendary unit. "We need more proof," Olivia said finally. "Real proof. Because if we're wrong about this, our careers are over." "But if we're right," Noah finished, "then we've been mocking a ghost who came back to remind us what real skill looks like." Outside, the California wind whistled through the desert, carrying with it the promise of secrets about to be unveiled. 3 weeks after the incident, Captain Olivia Martinez felt like she was drowning in doubt and humiliation. The mockery had evolved from good-natured ribbing to something more corrosive, a systematic undermining of her credibility that threatened everything she'd worked to build. Colonel Harrison had made good on his promise to discuss proper flight line security protocols. The meeting had been a masterclass in professional humiliation, with Harrison questioning not just Olivia's judgment that day, but her overall fitness for training responsibilities. "Martinez, I've been reviewing your performance reports," Harrison had said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Your flight scores are excellent, your technical knowledge is solid, but leadership requires more than individual skill. It requires sound judgment." Olivia had sat rigidly at attention, knowing where this was leading. Allowing an unauthorized civilian onto a restricted flight line shows a concerning lack of judgment, but worse than that is your continued insistence that what happened was somehow extraordinary. Harrison had leaned back in his chair, his expression one of disappointed patience. "I need instructors who can distinguish between reality and fantasy, Martinez. I can't have my training staff chasing ghosts." The consequences were swift and humiliating. Olivia's flight time was reduced. Her pilots were reassigned to other instructors. Her recommendations for advanced training programs were quietly shelved. She found herself relegated to equipment inspections and administrative duties, military purgatory for a pilot who lived to fly. The worst part was watching her former pilots adapt to their new reality. Ryan had thrown himself into impressing his new instructor, Major Cooper, by openly mocking the Ghost Lady incident. Madison had deleted all her flight calculations and refused to discuss the event. Even Noah, who had seemed so convinced of the woman's identity, had grown quiet and withdrawn. Olivia spent her days in the hangar, checking maintenance logs and filling out inventory reports, feeling like her career was slowly dissolving. The other instructors treated her with polite distance. Not quite outright hostility, but the kind of professional isolation that made it clear she was no longer part of the inner circle. It was during one of these mind-numbing inventory sessions that General Donnelly herself appeared in the hangar doorway. Olivia immediately snapped to attention, her heart racing. The base commander rarely visited the lower-level facilities personally. "At ease, Captain Martinez." Donnelly entered the hangar, her sharp eyes taking in the meticulously organized maintenance area. "I wanted to speak with you privately about the incident on your former flight line." "Ma'am, I understand my actions showed poor judgment." Donnelly held up a hand. "Actually, Martinez, I'm less concerned with your allowing a civilian to fly one pattern than I am with what happened afterward." Olivia felt confusion replace her dread. "Ma'am? I've been hearing interesting reports from some of my contacts at other installations. It seems we're not the only base that's had unexpected visitors recently." Donnelly moved deeper into the hangar, her voice dropping to a more conversational tone. "Nellis had an incident 2 months ago. Elderly gentleman who demonstrated some unusual aircraft maintenance techniques. Langley reported a woman matching your mystery pilot's description who helped their mechanics solve a problem with a malfunctioning F-22 engine that had stumped their experts. Olivia's pulse quickened. Ma'am, are you saying... I'm saying that sometimes the most extraordinary explanations are the most accurate ones. Donnelly turned to face her directly. Martinez, I want you to tell me exactly what you saw that day. No embellishment, no second-guessing yourself. Just what happened. Olivia described the event in detail, from the woman's initial approach to the impossible maneuvers to her quiet departure. Donnelly listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. And you're certain about what you witnessed? One elderly woman executing maneuvers in an F-4 that should have been physically impossible for both the aircraft and pilot? Ma'am, I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times. I know how it sounds, but... It sounds like techniques that were developed by a classified special operations unit in the early 1990s. Donnelly's words hit Olivia like a physical blow. Techniques that were supposedly lost when that unit was disbanded after suffering heavy casualties in the Gulf War. The hangar fell silent except for the distant hum of aircraft on the flight line. Olivia felt her world shifting, reality reshaping itself around possibilities she barely allowed herself to consider. Ma'am, what are you telling me? Donnelly moved to the window, looking out at the desert where the mysterious woman had vanished. I'm telling you that sometimes legends walk among us, Martinez. And sometimes those legends need to remain legends for very good reasons. But if she's real, if she's who Lieutenant Wilson thinks she might be, then she's paid a price for her service that most of us can't imagine, and she's earned the right to live quietly without having her past dragged into the light by well-meaning pilots who don't understand the full picture. Olivia felt a surge of frustration. So we just ignore it? Pretend it didn't happen? Donnelly turned back to her, her expression serious. No, Martinez, we learn from it. We remember that skill and sacrifice come in many forms, often from unexpected sources, and we make sure that when legends choose to share their knowledge with us, we're worthy of the gift. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means you're being reinstated to full training duties, effective immediately. Your flight assignments are restored, and your pilots will be returned to your supervision. Donnelly headed toward the door, then paused. It also means that if certain individuals should happen to visit your flight line again, you'll treat them with the respect that their demonstrated abilities have earned. After Donnelly left, Olivia stood alone in the hangar, her mind reeling. Everything she'd believed about the incident, about her career, about the woman herself was shifting. But one question remained unanswered. If she really was who Noah suspected, why had she come to their base? What was she trying to tell them? That evening, Olivia found Noah in the officer's quarters, still hunched over his laptop despite the late hour. Unlike before, though, Noah wasn't searching through classified archives. Instead, he was reading what appeared to be a personal blog. Find something new? Olivia asked. Noah looked up, his face grim. Captain, I think I know why she came to our base specifically. He turned the laptop screen toward Olivia. The blog was titled Military Families Connected, and the post Noah was reading was from 6 months earlier. My mother served in the Gulf War. She was killed in action in 1991, part of a classified operation that our family was never told much about. I've spent 30 years trying to learn what happened to her, where she's buried, if she suffered. The military says the records are classified indefinitely. All I have is her call sign, Phantom Queen, and the knowledge that she died serving her country. If anyone has information about Operation Sandstorm or Spectre Wing, please contact me. A daughter just wants to know what happened to her mother. The post was signed Caroline Bennett. Olivia felt her blood chill. When was this posted? 6 months ago. But look at this. Noah scrolled down to show a response from just 2 months earlier. Caroline, this is General Patricia Donnelly, currently stationed at Edwards Air Force Base in California. I served with someone who might have known your mother. I can't share classified information publicly, but if you'd like to visit our base, I might be able to connect you with some people who understand your loss. Sometimes the best way to honor our fallen is to ensure their skills and sacrifice are remembered by the next generation. Olivia stared at the screen, the pieces finally clicking into place. She wasn't random, she whispered. Donnelly invited her here. And she came to see if the new generation was worth teaching, Noah added quietly. She came to see if we deserved to learn what her comrades died protecting. The weight of their failure hit Olivia like a physical blow. They hadn't just mocked an old woman taking a joyride. They'd mocked a living legend who had lost her squadron to classified operations, who had spent 30 years living under a false identity, who had finally found someone willing to help her honor her comrade's memory. And instead of recognizing the gift they were being offered, they had laughed. Noah, we have to make this right. How? We don't even know her real name, where she lives, how to find her. Olivia stood up, her resolve hardening. Then we start by making sure that if she ever comes back, we're ready. We're going to learn everything we can about advanced flight techniques. We're going to become the kind of pilots her squadron would have been proud to fly alongside. And if she doesn't come back... Olivia looked out the window at the desert night, stars brilliant in the clear sky. Then we'll make sure the next generation knows that legends aren't just stories. They're reminders of what's possible when skill meets sacrifice. The breaking point had passed. Now came the hard work of proving they deserved a second chance. Olivia threw herself into research with the intensity of a woman seeking redemption. Within 48 hours of her conversation with General Donnelly, she had transformed from a disgraced instructor into the most motivated officer on base. Her quarters became a command center, walls covered with printouts, timelines, and every piece of information she could gather about Spectre Wing and Operation Sandstorm. Noah proved to be an invaluable research partner, his technical skills and database access opening doors that Olivia couldn't reach alone. Together they worked through the nights, cross-referencing incident reports, analyzing flight studies, and piecing together fragments of a story that someone had worked very hard to bury. Look at this, Noah said, during one of their late-night sessions, pointing to a declassified after-action report from 1991. Operation Sandstorm involved a 12-person team, 6 male, 6 female. The female unit was designated Spectre Wing, led by someone with the call sign Phantom Queen. Olivia leaned over Noah's shoulder to read the heavily redacted document. Says here they were deployed for high-value air defense penetration in contested terrain. Standard special ops language. Yeah, but look at the mission success rate. Noah highlighted a section that had somehow escaped the sensor's black marker. 37 confirmed sorties over 14 months, 0 aircraft lost until the final mission. What happened on the final mission? Noah clicked to another document, this one even more heavily redacted. Ambush at a location called Sigma Valley. The male team was pinned down by superior forces. Spectre Wing was sent in for close air support. Olivia read the sparse details that remained visible. 6 of the male team members were successfully extracted. The Spectre Wing, 3 KIA, 2 WIA, 1 MIA. The MIA was the team leader, Phantom Queen herself. Noah's voice was quiet. Caroline Bennett's mother. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the tragedy settling over them. These weren't just classified documents. They were someone's family history, written in blood and redacted with bureaucratic indifference. Olivia's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Ryan. Captain, you need to see this. Hangar 7. Now. They found Ryan standing at the maintenance bay, holding something in his hand. His usual joking demeanor was replaced by something approaching reverence. I was doing some extra work on the simulator, trying to figure out those maneuvers. Ryan said, Look what I found wedged behind the old F-4's instrument panel. He held out a small, tarnished piece of metal, a military insignia, silver and black, with numbers barely visible, 001. Noah's breath caught. Phantom Queen 001. That's a unit designator. Olivia took the insignia, feeling its weight. It was old, worn smooth by years of handling. Someone had carried this through combat, through loss, through 30 years of unofficial exile. She left it for us, Ryan said. She wanted us to know. Know what? Olivia asked. That she's real? That Spectre Wing was real? That everything we saw actually happened? Or maybe she's asking what we're going to do with this knowledge, Noah suggested quietly. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Olivia's quarters. Major Cooper knocked on her door at 0600, his usual antagonistic demeanor replaced by something resembling concern. "Martinez, we need to talk." Olivia invited him in, wondering if this was another attempt at humiliation. Instead, Cooper sat down heavily and pulled out his own folder of documents. "I owe you an apology," Cooper said without preamble. "I've been giving you hell about that ghost lady incident, but something happened yesterday that's got me thinking." He opened his folder to reveal photographs, surveillance stills from various military installations across the Southwest. In each image, Olivia could make out a small figure in a faded flight jacket, sometimes talking to young pilots, sometimes observing training exercises from a distance. "These photos span the last 6 months," Cooper continued. "Nellis, Davis-Monthan, Luke Air Force Base, Langley. Always the same woman, always the same behavior pattern. She shows up, observes or participates in some small way, then disappears." Olivia studied the images. The figure was too distant to make out facial features clearly, but the posture, the clothing, the way she carried herself, it all matched their mysterious visitor. "James, where did you get these?" "I've got friends at other installations." Started making some calls after Donnelly mentioned similar incidents. Cooper leaned back, his expression troubled. "Martinez, this woman isn't random, and she's not crazy. She's systematic. She's evaluating something." "Evaluating what?" "That's what scares me. What if she's not just some veteran reliving old glory? What if she's testing us? Seeing if the current generation of pilots measures up to whatever standard she represents. And if we don't, then maybe she reports back to whoever sent her that American air power has gone soft, that the next generation isn't ready for whatever's coming." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "You think she's still active? Still part of some operation?" "I think," Cooper said carefully, "that legends don't stay buried unless there's a very good reason. I think that reason might be that they're still needed." That afternoon, Olivia received new orders that confirmed her suspicions about Donnelly's involvement. She was to report to a classified briefing room in the base's administrative complex, a section she'd never accessed before. The briefing room was small, windowless, and filled with equipment Olivia didn't recognize. Donnelly was there, along with 2 people in civilian clothes who introduced themselves only as consultants from Washington. "Captain Martinez," Donnelly began, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Your security clearance has been temporarily elevated for this briefing, but everything you hear stays in this room." Olivia nodded, her pulse quickening. One of the civilians, a woman in her 40s with sharp intelligence in her eyes, spoke next. "Operation Sandstorm was disbanded in 1991 following heavy casualties, but the techniques developed by Spectre Wing were preserved in classified archives. Recently, certain geopolitical developments have suggested we might need those capabilities again." The second civilian, an older man with the bearing of a career intelligence officer, continued the explanation. "We've been authorized to identify and recruit individuals who might be capable of learning and implementing those techniques. The problem is, the only person who fully understood the methodology was declared MIA 30 years ago." "Except she wasn't," Olivia said quietly. Donnelly nodded. "Margaret Bennett, that's her full name, managed to extract herself from the Sigma Valley ambush, but not before watching her entire squadron die. She was medically retired due to PTSD and physical injuries, and her official status was changed to MIA to protect her identity and allow her to disappear. Why? Because she knew too much," the female civilian answered. "Had capabilities that certain foreign powers would pay handsomely to acquire. Making her officially dead was the only way to keep her safe. But now you need her back." "We need her knowledge," the male civilian corrected. "The techniques she developed might be the difference between success and failure in upcoming operations. But Margaret Bennett has made it clear through intermediaries that she won't cooperate with official government requests." Donnelly leaned forward. "However, she might be willing to teach pilots she considers worthy. Pilots who demonstrate the right combination of skill, respect, and understanding of what service really means." Olivia felt the pieces clicking into place. "The visits to different bases. She's been testing us. And so far, every installation has failed her evaluation," the female civilian said. "We mocked her too," Olivia protested. Initially, yes. But then you investigated. You sought to understand. You treated her abilities with the respect they deserved. Donnelly stood up. Margaret Bennett has agreed to return to Edwards for one final evaluation. If she determines that you and your pilots are capable of learning what she has to teach, she'll provide training in the techniques that made Spectre Wing legendary. And if we fail, the room fell silent. Finally, the male civilian spoke. Then those techniques die with her, and American air power loses capabilities that took decades of combat experience to develop. Olivia felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Everything. Her career, her pilot's futures, potentially critical military capabilities, hinged on proving worthy of a ghost's approval. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow," Donnelly replied. "She arrives at 1,400 hours. Be ready, Captain. This time, there won't be any second chances." At 1,355 hours, Olivia stood at the entrance to Hangar 7, with her heart hammering against her ribs. Her pilots, Ryan, Madison, Noah, and the others, were arranged in perfect formation behind her, their usual casual banter replaced by nervous tension. Word of the special evaluation had spread through unofficial channels, and everyone understood that something significant was about to happen. General Donnelly had positioned herself at a discreet distance, flanked by the two civilians from yesterday's briefing. The entire scene felt like a military tribunal, with Olivia and her squadron as the defendants. At exactly 1,400 hours, she appeared. Margaret Bennett walked across the tarmac with the same unhurried pace as before, still wearing her faded flight jackets, still carrying a weathered helmet. But this time, Olivia saw her differently. The slight frame didn't suggest frailty. It spoke of someone who had learned to move without drawing attention. The weathered hands weren't signs of age. They were proof of decades spent handling aircraft in conditions that would break lesser pilots. She stopped at the hangar entrance and looked directly at Olivia. "Captain Martinez." The fact that she knew her name shouldn't have surprised Olivia, but it did. "Ma'am, I understand you've been asking questions about me." Olivia felt her mouth go dry. "Yes, ma'am. We wanted to understand what we witnessed." "And what did you conclude?" Noah stepped forward slightly, his voice respectful but clear. "Ma'am, we believe you're Margaret Bennett, former team leader of Spectre Wing, callsign Phantom Queen. We believe you've been evaluating military training programs to determine if current pilots are capable of learning advanced tactical techniques." Margaret's expression didn't change, but Olivia caught the slightest nod. "Why would that matter to you?" "Lieutenant Wilson, ma'am. And it matters because we failed your first test. We mocked something we didn't understand, dismissed skills we couldn't comprehend. We want a chance to prove we can do better." "Better at what?" Ryan spoke up, his usual joking tone replaced by earnest sincerity. "Better at recognizing excellence when we see it. Better at showing respect to those who've earned it. Better at being the kind of pilots who deserve to learn from legends." Margaret walked closer to the flight line, her movements fluid despite her apparent age. "Legends," she repeated. "Is that what you think I am?" "Ma'am," Olivia said carefully, "we think you're someone who sacrificed everything for your country, who lost people you cared about, and who's been carrying that burden alone for 30 years. We think you've been looking for pilots worthy of carrying on what your team died protecting." For the first time, Margaret's composed facade cracked slightly. Pain flickered across her features before she regained control. "My team died because I made decisions that saved others at their expense. What they protected wasn't techniques or tactics. It was the idea that some fights are worth winning, regardless of the personal cost." She reached into her jacket and pulled out something that made Olivia's breath catch. A photograph, creased and faded, showing 6 women in flight gear. They looked impossibly young, their faces bright, with the confidence of pilots who hadn't yet learned what war could take from them. "Spectre Wing," Margaret said quietly. "Sarah Williams, my second in command. Jennifer Taylor, our weapons specialist. Patricia Garcia, electronic warfare expert. Maria Rodriguez, communications. Rebecca Foster, our youngest, at 22. She paused, her finger tracing the face of a young woman who bore an unmistakable resemblance to her current appearance. And Lieutenant Margaret Bennett, who thought she was smart enough to get everyone home alive. The hangar fell silent except for the distant sound of aircraft engines. Olivia could see the pain in Margaret's eyes. 3 decades of survivor's guilt compressed into a moment of raw honesty. "What happened in Sigma Valley?" Noah asked softly. Margaret was quiet for so long that Olivia thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We were scrambled to provide close air support for a special forces team, 12 men who'd walked into an ambush. Superior numbers, elevated positions, our people caught in a kill zone with no cover. Standard doctrine said to call in heavy bombers and wait, but bomber support was 40 minutes out, and those men would be dead in 10. She set the photograph down carefully on a nearby workbench. "I made the call to go in. Spectre Wing specialized in impossible approaches and hitting targets other pilots couldn't reach. We could provide cover, create confusion, give them a chance to move." Madison leaned forward. "It worked, didn't it?" The after-action report said the extraction was successful. "It worked. All 12 men made it out alive. But the enemy figured out our flight patterns during the firefight. We were compromised, targeted by surface-to-air missiles, outgunned." Margaret's voice hardened. "I had a choice. Try to extract my squadron and probably lose everyone, or ensure the mission's success by staying engaged long enough for the others to reach the extraction point." Ryan understood first. "You ordered your squadron to hold position while the men they'd saved escaped." "I ordered my team to do their duty. They chose to follow that order, even when they understood what it meant." Margaret picked up her helmet, running her fingers over a barely visible scratch with movements that spoke of decades of regret. "Sarah took a direct hit while covering my approach to a new position. Jennifer held an attack corridor alone against 3 MiGs until she ran out of ammunition. Patricia used her last countermeasures to divert a heat-seeking missile, buying us 3 more minutes." The weight of her words settled over them like a physical presence. These weren't just military casualties. They were friends, sisters, pilots, who had chosen death over abandoning their mission. "Maria and Rebecca?" Olivia asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Maria took shrapnel from an anti-aircraft battery while relaying our coordinates for the extraction. She stayed on the radio until she bled out, making sure everyone knew where to find me." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. Rebecca was 22 years old. She could have made it to the extraction point, but she saw me pinned down by enemy fire. She came back for me." Margaret's hands trembled slightly, not from age or weakness, but from the weight of memories that never faded. "She died pulling me to safety, put herself between me and ground fire, took rounds that were meant for me. Her last words were, 'Don't let it be for nothing, Phantom.' She looked directly at each pilot in turn. So when I see young flyers laughing at things they don't understand, treating aircraft like toys, acting like war is a game, I remember 5 women who died believing their sacrifice would ensure the next generation was better prepared. I wonder if they were wrong." The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Olivia understood now that this wasn't just about learning advanced flight techniques. It was about proving worthy of knowledge bought with blood, about demonstrating the kind of character that would honor the memory of Spectre Wing. "Ma'am," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her, "tell us what we need to do." Margaret walked to the F-4 Phantom that sat in the corner of the hangar, the same aircraft she'd flown weeks earlier. It had been cleaned and serviced, its weathered appearance somehow more dignified now that they understood its history. "The techniques you witnessed aren't magic. They're physics, mathematics, and muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of practice. But more than that, they're trust. Trust in your aircraft, trust in your training, trust in your purpose." She ran her hand along the fuselage. "Anyone can learn to fly straight. Learning to make flights that matter, flights that save lives, flights that end conflicts, that requires understanding why you're pulling maneuvers." Margaret turned to face them. "I'm offering to see if you're capable of learning." The techniques that made Spectre Wing effective weren't just about aerial maneuvers. They were about trust, sacrifice, and the willingness to put mission success above personal survival. "If you can demonstrate those qualities, then yes, I'll teach you what my team died protecting." She walked toward the hangar exit, then paused. "Be here tomorrow at 0500. Bring your flight gear, your best intentions, and leave your egos in the barracks." As Margaret disappeared across the tarmac once again, Olivia felt the weight of opportunity and responsibility settling on her shoulders. They had been given a second chance, not just to learn from a legend, but to prove themselves worthy of carrying forward the sacrifice of Spectre Wing. The question now was whether they were strong enough to bear that honor. At 0455 hours, Olivia and her pilot stood in perfect formation at Hangar 7, their flight gear checked and ready, their expressions serious. The pre-dawn air was crisp and cold, stars still visible in the lightening sky. Each pilot had spent the sleepless night thinking about Margaret's words, about Spectre Wing, about the weight of the knowledge they might be privileged to receive. Margaret emerged from the pre-dawn darkness exactly at 0500, moving with the silent efficiency of someone accustomed to operating without detection. She wore the same faded flight jacket, carried the same weathered helmet, but her demeanor had shifted. This wasn't the grieving survivor or the mysterious visitor. This was Lieutenant Colonel Margaret Bennett, instructor and commander. "Formation!" she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had led pilots in combat. The squadron snapped to attention instantly. "For the next 4 weeks, you will report here at 0500 every morning, except Sunday. You will train until you can perform these techniques under any conditions: fatigue, stress, darkness, simulated combat. Some of you will succeed, some will not. Those who fail will be returned to standard training with no questions asked and no record of this program in their files." She began walking down the line, inspecting each pilot like a general reviewing troops before battle. "This is not a game. The techniques you're about to learn were developed in combat, tested under fire, and perfected by pilots who died, believing their knowledge would save future lives. You will treat this training with the respect that sacrifice deserves." Margaret stopped in front of Ryan Jackson. "What's your primary motivation for being here?" Ryan straightened. "Ma'am, I want to be the best pilot I can be." "Wrong answer." Margaret's voice was sharp. "Try again." Ryan looked confused. "Ma'am, I want to honor the memory of Spectre Wing." "Better, but still incomplete." Margaret moved to Madison Taylor. "Why are you here?" Madison's technical mind kicked in. "Ma'am, I want to understand the aerodynamics and mathematics behind the advanced maneuvers." Partially correct, but missing the point. Margaret continued down the line. "Wilson, your motivation?" Noah had clearly given this thought. "Ma'am, I want to learn skills that could save lives in combat situations where conventional tactics fail." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Closer." "Martinez?" Olivia met her eyes directly. "Ma'am, I want to prove worthy of carrying forward the knowledge that Spectre Wing died protecting, and I want to ensure these techniques are preserved for pilots who might need them to complete impossible missions." For the first time since arriving, Margaret smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her weathered features. "Acceptable. The purpose of this training isn't to make you better pilots. It's to make you problem solvers, mission completers, airmen who can succeed when failure means death." She led them to the flight line, where she had set up a series of training stations unlike anything they'd seen before. Instead of standard flight simulators, there were complex scenario generators, stress induction equipment, and what appeared to be a miniature command center constructed from salvaged parts. "Traditional flight training teaches you to fly within the envelope," Margaret explained. "Spectre Wing techniques teach you to accomplish what you need to accomplish, regardless of conventional limitations." "Taylor, step forward." Madison approached nervously as Margaret handed her a flight helmet with modified visuals. "This simulation recreates the conditions over Sigma Valley. The targets are behind a mountain ridge, 30 degrees left, approximately 20 miles out. No direct approach possible. Using conventional tactics, how would you engage?" "Ma'am, I'd increase altitude to clear the ridge and then approach from above. And if increased altitude triggers advanced air defenses, if you're low on fuel, if you have wounded aboard, who won't survive the G-forces of a steep climb?" Madison studied the simulation readings, her analytical mind working through the problem. "I'd need to use the terrain-hugging techniques you demonstrated, but I don't understand the mechanics yet." Margaret nodded. "Honest answer. Watch." She took the helmet and demonstrated a series of maneuvers on the simulator. The screen showed an F-4 skimming impossibly close to terrain features, using thermal updrafts, pressure differentials, and micro-weather patterns to maintain both speed and stealth while approaching targets that should have been unreachable from that direction. The physics are complex, but the principle is simple, Margaret explained. Every environment has predictable energy patterns. Every aircraft has known response characteristics. When you combine mathematical calculation with instinctive adjustment, you can engage targets that conventional wisdom says are impossible to reach. Noah was furiously taking notes. Ma'am, the variables alone, wind, temperature, terrain effects on aerodynamics, all accountable for and predictable, Margaret confirmed. Spectre Wing spent 14 months in controlled environments, flying thousands of sorties, documenting every variable. The mathematics exist. The question is whether you can internalize them fast enough to make split-second calculations under combat stress. Over the following days, the training intensified. Margaret pushed them through exercises that challenged not just their flying skills but their understanding of physics, their ability to work as a team, and their mental resilience under pressure. Ryan discovered he had an intuitive grasp of spatial relationships that made him surprisingly effective at calculating approach vectors. Madison's technical background allowed her to understand the mathematical principles quickly, but she struggled with the instinctive adjustments needed for real-world conditions. Noah proved to be the most naturally gifted student, combining analytical thinking with steady nerves under pressure. But it was Olivia who surprised everyone, including herself. Her years of instructing had given her an understanding of how different pilots learned, and Margaret began using her as an assistant instructor, helping the others work through their individual challenges. Martinez, Margaret said during the second week, as they watched the pilots practice on increasingly complex simulator arrays. You have leadership instincts that remind me of my second-in-command, Sarah Williams. Margaret's expression grew distant. Sarah had the ability to see not just what each pilot was capable of, but what they needed to reach that capability. She could take a group of individuals and forge them into a unit that trusted each other completely. She looked at Olivia directly. That's what these techniques really require. Absolute trust in your team, because in combat you'll often be flying into situations where a miscalculation could hit friendlies instead of enemies. The breakthrough came during the third week, when Margaret introduced them to the final challenge, executing complex maneuvers in close formation while working as a coordinated team. It was a scenario designed to simulate the conditions Spectre Wing had faced in Sigma Valley. Multiple threats, limited fuel, no room for error. Jackson, your eyes high, calculating approach vectors. Taylor, you're monitoring energy states and predicting stress points. Wilson, you're flying lead. Martinez, you're team leader and secondary support. The simulators were programmed to recreate the mountainous terrain of the valley, complete with enemy positions and the trapped Special Forces team. The squadron had to communicate constantly, sharing information and adjusting their calculations in real time. The first attempt was a disaster. The second was marginally better, but by the fourth run, something clicked. They began moving and thinking as a unit, each member contributing their specialized knowledge to the collective effort. When Noah executed a perfect terrain-hugging approach to extract a downed pilot while under simulated fire, the team erupted in celebration. But Margaret's reaction was more measured. Adequate, she said simply, but adequacy gets people killed. Again. They ran the exercise 17 more times that day, each iteration pushing them closer to the seamless coordination that Margaret demanded. By the end of the session, they were executing maneuvers they couldn't have imagined 4 weeks earlier, engaging multiple threats simultaneously, and doing it all with the kind of precision that had made Spectre Wing legendary. That evening, as they reviewed their performance data in exhausted silence, Ryan voiced what they were all thinking. I'm starting to understand why this training was classified, he said. It's not just about the techniques. It's about becoming a different kind of pilot entirely. Margaret, who had been quietly observing their debrief, nodded approvingly. Spectre Wing wasn't just a fighter squadron. We were problem solvers, mission completers, pilots who could succeed when conventional tactics failed. That's what you're becoming. Are we ready? Noah asked. Margaret considered the question seriously. You're ready for the final test. Whether you pass it depends on whether you've internalized not just the techniques, but the mindset that makes them effective. What kind of test? Madison asked. Margaret's smile was enigmatic. The same test Spectre Wing faced in Sigma Valley, a scenario where technique alone isn't enough, where success requires the willingness to sacrifice everything for mission completion. The training area fell silent as the implications sank in. They'd learned the techniques, mastered the calculations, developed the teamwork, but the final test would measure something deeper: their character, their commitment, their worthiness to carry forward the legacy of Spectre Wing. The question was, were they ready to prove themselves worthy of that honor? The fourth week arrived with an unexpected announcement. General Donnelly called Olivia to her office and delivered news that changed everything. "Martinez, I just received word from Washington. There's been a development in the South China Sea. American relief workers, taken hostage by a militant group, holed up on a small island with advanced air defenses. Initial reconnaissance shows the targets are being held in a location that makes conventional assault impossible. Heavily forested terrain, multiple anti-aircraft batteries, no clear approach vectors." Olivia felt her stomach tighten. "Ma'am, are you saying—" "I'm saying that in 72 hours, a special operations team is going to attempt a rescue that requires exactly the skills Margaret has been teaching you. The mission planners have reviewed the tactical situation and determined that Spectre Wing techniques might be the only way to neutralize the threat without massive civilian casualties." Donnelly leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "The original plan was to complete your training first, then gradually integrate these techniques into special operations programs over the next year. But events have accelerated beyond our control. What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking if you and your team are ready to put your training to the ultimate test. Not in simulation, not in controlled conditions, but in actual combat, where failure means American lives lost." Olivia felt the weight of 4 weeks of training, of Margaret's sacrifice, of Spectre Wing's legacy pressing down on her. "Ma'am, I don't think—" "Before you answer," Donnelly interrupted, "you should know that Margaret has volunteered to accompany the mission as an advisor. At 67 years old, with a medical profile that should have forced her retirement decades ago, she's willing to return to combat to ensure these techniques are properly implemented." The decision crystallized in Olivia's mind. Margaret had lost everything for these techniques, had carried them alone for 30 years, and was now willing to risk her life again to see them used properly. How could she do less? "Ma'am, we'll need 48 hours to complete our final training exercises. But yes, we're ready." Margaret received the news with characteristic stoicism. When Olivia briefed the team that evening, they had gathered in a secure conference room, the simulator data visible on screens as a reminder of how far they'd come. "The island configuration matches the Sigma Valley scenario almost exactly," Margaret explained, pointing to satellite photos spread across the table. "Elevated terrain, dense forest cover, multiple anti-aircraft installations. The hostages are being held in a central compound with no direct lines of approach from any feasible insertion point." Ryan studied the photos. "How many hostiles?" "Intelligence estimates 15 to 20 fighters, with shoulder-launched surface-to-air missiles and heavy machine guns. They're using the hostages as human shields, positioned so that any conventional assault would result in civilian casualties." Madison was already running calculations on her tablet. "The approach vectors we'd need to use. We'd have to come in from at least 3 different directions simultaneously, below radar, using the terrain for cover." "Correct, which means splitting the team and coordinating attack runs while under enemy fire." Margaret's voice carried the weight of experience. "This is where Spectre Wing techniques become more than fancy flying. They become strategic warfare." Noah raised the obvious concern. "Ma'am, we've been training for 4 weeks." Spectre Wing trained for years before their deployment. Margaret met his eyes directly. "Spectre Wing had the luxury of extended training because we were developing these techniques from scratch. You're implementing proven methods. The question isn't whether you have enough experience. It's whether you have enough trust." "Trust in what?" Olivia asked. "Trust in each other. Trust in your training. Trust in the knowledge that sometimes the only way to save lives is to risk everything on an impossible approach." Margaret stood up, her small frame somehow commanding the room. "In Sigma Valley, my team trusted me to make the right call, even when it meant their deaths. I'm asking you to trust me one more time." The next 48 hours were a blur of intensive preparation. Margaret pushed them through scenario after scenario, each one designed to replicate the stress and confusion of actual combat. They practiced coordinated approaches from multiple vectors, They learned to communicate through hand signals when radio contact was compromised. They rehearsed rapid extraction under simulated enemy fire. But most importantly, they learned to trust each other completely. On the final night before deployment, Margaret gathered them around a small campfire on the edge of the base, away from official oversight. It was just 6 pilots sharing stories and preparing for what might be their last night together. "I want each of you to understand something," Margaret said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still air. "What we're about to do isn't just a rescue mission. It's a validation of everything Spectre Wing died believing, that some techniques, some knowledge, some sacrifices are worth preserving because they save lives." She pulled out the faded photograph of her original team. Sarah, Jennifer, Patricia, Maria, Rebecca. They didn't die for techniques or tactics. They died believing that future pilots would be better prepared, more capable, more effective because of what they learned. Margaret looked at each of them in turn. "Tomorrow you have the chance to prove they were right." Ryan spoke first. "Ma'am, what if we fail? What if we're not good enough? Then you'll fail honorably, attempting something that matters more than your own safety. But you won't fail because of lack of preparation or lack of skill. If you fail, it will be because the mission was impossible. And that's a risk worth taking for American lives." Madison was characteristically analytical. "The probability calculations alone suggest." Margaret held up a hand. "Numbers can't account for will, determination, and the willingness to succeed against impossible odds. Spectre Wing succeeded in 18 missions that should have been mathematically impossible. We succeeded because we trusted each other and trusted our purpose." Noah asked the question they were all thinking. "Ma'am, are you scared?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I've been scared for 30 years. Scared that my team's sacrifice would be forgotten, that their knowledge would die with me, that future pilots would face impossible situations without the tools to succeed." She looked up at them. "Tomorrow, for the first time in 30 years, I won't be scared, because I'll know that Spectre Wing's legacy lives on." Olivia felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. "What do you need from us? I need you to remember that you're not just pilots on a mission. You're the inheritors of a legacy paid for in blood. I need you to trust your training, trust each other, and trust that sometimes the impossible is just another word for difficult, but achievable." The fire crackled in silence as each pilot contemplated what lay ahead. They had trained for this moment, prepared for this test, but tomorrow would determine whether they were truly worthy of the knowledge they'd been privileged to receive. As they prepared to return to base for final equipment checks and briefings, Margaret called Olivia aside. "Martinez, there's something you need to know about the South China Sea mission." Olivia felt her pulse quicken. "Ma'am? The hostage rescue is real. The threat is real. But there's another element to this mission that wasn't included in your briefing." Margaret's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Intelligence suggests this militant group has acquired advanced surface-to-air missile systems, the kind that make helicopter extraction extremely dangerous." "Meaning?" "Meaning that even if we succeed in the rescue, getting out alive might be another impossible mission entirely." Margaret's expression was grave but determined. "I wanted you to know what you're really volunteering for. This isn't just about proving your skills. It's about accepting the same risks Spectre faced in Sigma Valley." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night. "Are you saying this could be a one-way mission?" "I'm saying that heroes are defined not by their survival, but by their willingness to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves." Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "The choice is yours, Martinez. You can withdraw your team, complete your training in safety, and serve with honor in conventional roles. Or you can step forward and discover what you're truly capable of when everything is on the line." Olivia looked back at her team. Ryan, with his newfound appreciation for precision, Madison with her obsessive technical mastery, Noah with his natural flying instincts. They had become more than pilots. They had become family, united by training that had pushed them beyond their perceived limitations. "Ma'am, we're going. All of us." Margaret's smile carried a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Then tomorrow you'll either prove worthy of Spectre Wing's legacy, or you'll die trying. Either way, you'll have honored everything they stood for." As they walked back toward the base lights, Olivia realized that the final test wasn't just about tactical skills or flying precision. It was about character, about the willingness to risk everything for something greater than personal survival. Tomorrow would determine whether they possessed that character. The C-130 transport cut through the pre-dawn darkness over the South China Sea, its cargo bay filled with tension, and the quiet efficiency of pilots preparing for combat. Olivia checked her equipment for the 5th time, her nerves sharp but controlled. Around her, Ryan, Madison, and Noah went through their own pre-mission rituals. Each pilot focused on the task ahead. Margaret sat across from them, her ancient flight helmet cradled in her arms like an old friend. At 67, wearing full combat gear and heading into hostile territory, she looked both fragile and indestructible, a living reminder that legends aren't just stories, but people who chose to become something greater than themselves. 15 minutes to drop, called the loadmaster. The plan was complex but elegant. Olivia and Noah would establish air cover from modified F-18s, providing suppressive fire and ricochet shots to neutralize anti-aircraft batteries in the central compound. Ryan and Madison would pilot specialized insertion craft, using Spectre wing techniques to approach through seemingly impossible vectors, delivering the Special Forces team to extract the hostages. Margaret would coordinate from a specialized command aircraft, calling out target priorities and ensuring tactical coordination. "Remember," Margaret said over the comm system, her voice steady despite the aircraft's vibration. "This isn't about perfect execution or textbook maneuvers. It's about adapting, improvising, and completing the mission regardless of what goes wrong." The insertion went smoothly. Under cover of darkness, they launched from the carrier, flying nap of the Earth to avoid radar detection. The island came into view, a dark mass against the South China Sea, ringed with the telltale electronic signatures of advanced weapon systems. Moving through the aerial terrain, Olivia was struck by how closely reality matched their training scenarios. The jagged mountain peaks, the wind patterns, the defensive positions. It was as if Margaret had designed their exercises specifically for this moment. "Eagle 1 in position," Olivia whispered into her radio as she reached her assigned patrol zone. The compound was visible below, exactly as the satellite photos had shown. A central clearing surrounded by dense forest, with American hostages visible under heavy guard. "Eagle 2 in position," Noah confirmed from his zone 5 miles away. "Ground team approaching phase line Alpha," Ryan reported as he and Madison guided their stealth insertion craft toward the compound's perimeter. Margaret's voice came through their earpieces with calm authority. "Confirm visual on 8 hostages, 14 visible guards, additional contacts likely in surrounding forest. Initiate on my mark." Olivia sighted through her targeting system, identifying anti-aircraft positions and calculating attack vectors just as Margaret had taught them. The mathematics that had seemed so theoretical in training suddenly became immediate and vital. Wind speed, target distance, terrain features, deflection angles. Everything Spectre Wing had died protecting was about to be put to the ultimate test. Mark. The coordinated assault began with precision that would have made Margaret's original team proud. Olivia's first strike neutralized an anti-aircraft battery with a carefully calculated approach that kept her below radar coverage. Noah's simultaneous attack disabled the compound's communications tower, preventing the militants from calling for reinforcements. Ryan and Madison delivered the Special Forces team with surgical precision, using terrain features to mask their approach in ways that conventional pilots would have deemed suicidal. Each maneuver was calculated, deliberate, designed to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk to the hostages. But combat, Margaret had warned them, never goes according to plan. "Contact rear!" Madison's voice cracked through the radio as additional militants emerged from positions they hadn't identified. "We've got reinforcements moving in from the east with shoulder-launched missiles." Olivia swiveled to acquire the new targets, but her position only offered limited visibility of the eastern approach. The careful geometry of their plan was dissolving into chaos as enemy forces appeared from unexpected directions. "Ground team, withdraw to rally point Bravo," Margaret ordered. "Eagles, provide covering fire for extraction." Her transmission cut off abruptly. Olivia's blood went cold as she scanned the island, searching for Margaret's command aircraft through her sensors. Through her targeting system, she could see it, damaged and losing altitude, trailing smoke as it descended toward the densely forested mountainside. "Phantom Queen is hit!" Noah's voice was tight with controlled panic, multiple SAM launches targeting her position. Olivia faced the same impossible choice Margaret had confronted in Sigma Valley 30 years earlier: follow the plan and withdraw to safety, or risk everything to save a teammate who was trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The choice took exactly 1 second. Noah, I'm moving to support Phantom Queen. Cover my approach and continue providing air support for the extraction team. Negative, that's not the plan. The plan just changed. Olivia was already moving, abandoning her assigned position to descend toward Margaret's damaged aircraft. Using every technique Margaret had taught them, she calculated an approach path that conventional flight instructors would have called impossible, using mountain ridges for cover, thermal updrafts for lift, and precise timing to evade enemy fire. She found Margaret's aircraft on a small plateau, damaged but intact. Through her sensors, she could see Margaret moving inside, injured but still coordinating the mission over her backup radio. Around them, the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly as more militants converged on their position. "Martinez, what the hell are you doing here?" Margaret demanded when Olivia established communication. "Completing the mission," Olivia replied, setting up a defensive perimeter with precision strikes. All of it. Together, they fought their way through the crisis, using every Spectre Wing technique in their arsenal: impossible approaches to hit enemies in cover, coordinated strikes to suppress multiple threats, the kind of tactical innovation that can only come from absolute trust between pilots who have trained together, flown together, and committed to succeeding together. The extraction was a running battle through contested airspace, with Olivia and Margaret providing covering fire while Ryan and Madison shepherded the rescued hostages to safety. Noah, still in his Overwatch position, continued to provide precision fire support that kept enemy reinforcements at bay. They reached the carrier with all hostages accounted for and no friendly casualties beyond Margaret's shoulder wound. The mission was accomplished, but it was only during the debrief that Olivia realized the full significance of what they had achieved. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mission commander said as he reviewed their after-action report, "what you accomplished today has been deemed tactically impossible by every military planning algorithm we possess. The precision required, the coordination under fire, the successful adaptation when the plan fell apart. It represents a level of small unit effectiveness that we haven't seen since." He paused, looking directly at Margaret. "Since Spectre Wing's final mission in Sigma Valley. The techniques you demonstrated today will be studied, documented, and integrated into special operations training worldwide. You've just proven that individual skill, properly coordinated, can overcome seemingly impossible odds." Later, as they prepared for transport back to Edwards, Margaret gathered Olivia's team for a final conversation. 30 years ago, my team died believing that what they had learned was worth preserving for future pilots. Today you proved they were right." Margaret's voice carried a satisfaction that Olivia had never heard before, the sound of a mission finally completed. "Ma'am, what happens now?" Noah asked. "Now you go back to your regular duties, but with the knowledge that you've mastered techniques that can save lives in impossible situations. Some of you will become instructors, teaching other pilots what you've learned. Some will go on to special operations, carrying Spectre Wing methods into new conflicts. All of you will remember that excellence isn't about individual achievement. It's about what you can accomplish when you trust each other completely." Ryan stepped forward. "What about you, ma'am? Are you going back to civilian life?" Margaret smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes completely. "I'm going to visit 5 graves in Arlington National Cemetery and tell some old friends that their sacrifice was worth it, that the techniques they died protecting just saved American lives, that the next generation proved worthy of their legacy." She pulled out the faded photograph of Spectre Wing one final time, but now Olivia could see peace in her expression instead of pain. Sarah, Jennifer, Patricia, Maria, Rebecca. They can finally rest, knowing their knowledge lives on in capable hands. Madison, ever analytical, asked the question that had been haunting her. "Ma'am, how do we live up to this? How do we make sure we're worthy of what they gave us?" Margaret's answer was simple, but profound. By remembering that skill without purpose is just showing off. By using what you've learned to protect others, not to glorify yourselves. By teaching the next generation that true legends don't need their names and lights. They just need to know that what they taught kept people safe. 6 months later, Olivia stood before a new group of pilots at Edwards Air Force Base, watching them set up their equipment with the casual confidence of flyers who thought they understood what aviation meant. The scene was achingly familiar. Young men and women convinced that modern technology and basic training had prepared them for anything combat might throw at them. But now Olivia knew better. She knew that the most dangerous person in any room might be the quietest one. She knew that legends sometimes walked among them in faded flight jackets, carrying knowledge that could save lives if they were wise enough to recognize it. Today we're going to learn about advanced flight techniques, Olivia announced to her new recruits. Specifically, we're going to learn about engaging targets when conventional methods fail. Lieutenant Samantha Walsh, fresh from flight school and full of modern aviator confidence, raised her hand. Captain, with all due respect, our current aircraft systems and targeting technology make most advanced techniques pretty obsolete, don't they? Olivia smiled, remembering a time when she might have agreed with her. Walsh, let me tell you about a woman who once visited this flight line. She was in her 60s, carried a helmet older than your parents, and proceeded to demonstrate capabilities that our most advanced technology can't replicate. She gestured toward the simulator Margaret had used for her training, now preserved as a permanent training station, the Spectre Wing Memorial Simulator. This exists to remind us that true skill isn't about having the newest equipment. It's about understanding your tools so completely that you can make them do things other people consider impossible. Lieutenant Michael Torres, the squad's designated smart mouth, snorted softly. Sounds like another military legend, Captain. You know how these stories grow in the telling. Olivia had been expecting this. In fact, she'd been counting on it. Torres, you think legends are just exaggerated stories? Most of the time, yeah. People want to believe in heroes and magic jets so they see what they want to see. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Interesting perspective. Hold that thought. She pulled out her radio and made a brief call. Phantom Queen, this is Edwards Base. We have some young pilots here who could benefit from a demonstration of impossible techniques. Are you available for a teaching moment? The response came through clearly enough for the recruits to hear. Copy, Edwards. I'm 5 minutes out. Set up the island scenario targets. The recruits exchanged confused glances as Olivia began arranging the complex simulator array that Margaret had used for their final training exercises. Virtual mountains at various angles, anti-aircraft positions creating impossible approach vectors, moving targets controlled by remote systems. Captain, Walsh asked uncertainly, who exactly did you just call? Someone who learned that respect is earned through competence, not conversation. Someone who understands that the most important lessons often come from people who've earned the right to stay quiet. Olivia finished setting up the targets and turned back to her recruits. Someone who's going to teach you that assumptions can be dangerous. At exactly 5 minutes, Margaret appeared at the hangar entrance. She looked the same as always, small, unremarkable, carrying her ancient flight helmet like a relic from another era. The recruits' reactions were predictably dismissive. That's your expert instructor? Torres whispered to Walsh. My grandmother could probably outfly her. Margaret approached the simulator with the same unhurried pace Olivia remembered from her first visit. She acknowledged Olivia with a slight nod, then addressed the recruits directly. I understand some of you have questions about advanced flight techniques. Walsh, to her credit, maintained military courtesy, despite her obvious skepticism. Ma'am, Captain Martinez mentioned some unconventional methods. We're interested in learning, but we're also curious about the practical applications of older techniques in modern warfare. Margaret smiled approvingly. A fair question. Let me show you something that might help clarify the relationship between technology and skill. She stepped into the simulator and initiated the program. The main screen displayed the South China Sea scenario in stunning detail. The island, the forest cover, the anti-aircraft positions. Margaret flew the virtual F-18 with the same impossible precision Olivia had witnessed months earlier, executing maneuvers that defied conventional flight parameters, neutralizing targets that should have been unreachable. The hangar fell silent except for the simulated sounds of aircraft and weapons fire. Torres stared at the tactical display, his casual arrogance replaced by stunned disbelief. How? That's not possible. The physics alone. The physics are completely sound, Margaret replied calmly. The mathematics are well documented. The techniques are proven in combat. What you're seeing isn't magic. It's the result of understanding your aircraft so completely that you can push it beyond its apparent limitations. Walsh found her voice first. Ma'am, who are you? Margaret looked at Olivia, who nodded encouragingly. I'm someone who learned these techniques from pilots who died believing that future generations would be better prepared for impossible situations. I'm someone who spent 30 years carrying knowledge alone, wondering if it would ever be needed again. She powered down the simulator and picked up her helmet, but mostly I'm someone who learned that the quiet ones, the people who don't talk much about their qualifications, who carry themselves without fanfare, who do their jobs without seeking recognition, are often the ones who've earned the right to stay quiet. Lieutenant Sarah Chin, the youngest member of the squad, raised her hand tentatively. Ma'am, would you be willing to teach us? Margaret studied the group with the same evaluating gaze Olivia remembered from her own first encounter. That depends. Are you prepared to learn that everything you think you know about aviation is just the beginning? Are you willing to trust techniques developed by people who faced situations where failure meant death? The recruits nodded eagerly, their initial skepticism replaced by hungry curiosity. Then we'll start tomorrow at 0500. Bring your flight gear, your best intentions, and leave your assumptions in the barracks. As Margaret walked toward the hangar exit, she paused and looked back at Torres. The next time you meet someone who doesn't match your expectations of what an expert should look like, remember this moment. As Margaret disappeared across the tarmac, Olivia turned back to her speechless recruits. The lesson had been delivered with characteristic efficiency, not through lectures or reprimands, but through undeniable demonstration of capability. Any questions about the relationship between appearance and ability? Olivia asked. The recruits shook their heads in unison. Good. Because tomorrow you're going to learn that true legends don't need their names and lights. They just need students worthy of carrying forward what they've learned. That evening, Olivia received a call from General Donnelly with news that made her smile. Martinez, I thought you should know that Margaret's techniques are being integrated into special operations training programs across all branches of the military. The South China Sea mission results were so impressive that the Pentagon has authorized the establishment of a new advanced flight program. That's excellent news, ma'am. There's more. Margaret has agreed to serve as the program's senior instructor, but only on the condition that you and your original team serve as assistant instructors. She says she trusts you to identify students who understand that skill without character is just showing off. Olivia felt the weight of honor and responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. Ma'am, we'd be privileged to serve in that capacity. I thought you might say that. There's one more thing. The program is being officially designated as the, quote, Spectre Wing Advanced Tactical Training Initiative. Margaret wanted to make sure her original team's names are permanently associated with the techniques they died protecting. After ending the call, Olivia walked out to the flight line, where Margaret often stood during her evening reflections. She was there, as Olivia had expected, looking out at the star-filled sky with the same quiet dignity that had defined her from their first meeting. Ma'am, I heard about the new program. Congratulations. Margaret turned to face her, and Olivia could see satisfaction in her expression. Not the satisfaction of personal achievement, but the deeper contentment of a mission finally completed. 30 years ago, 5 remarkable women died believing that what they'd learned would save future lives. Today, their knowledge is being preserved and shared with pilots who might face impossible situations. Margaret's voice carried a peace Olivia had never heard before. They can finally rest. What about you, ma'am? Are you finally at peace? Margaret smiled, and in that expression, Olivia saw not just the legend she'd become, but the young lieutenant who had once led pilots into combat, believing she could get everyone home alive. I'm at peace knowing that legends don't die when the person dies. They live on in the people who carry forward what was taught. Sarah, Jennifer, Patricia, Maria, Rebecca. Their names might not be in history books, but their knowledge will save lives for generations to come. She began walking back toward the base, then paused one final time. Martinez, remember this. The most dangerous person in any room might be the one everyone ignores. The most skilled pilot on your team might be the one who never mentions their qualifications, and the most important lessons often come from people who've earned the right to stay quiet. Yes, ma'am. We'll remember. Good. Because true legends don't need recognition. They just need to know that what they taught will keep people safe. As Margaret disappeared into the darkness, Olivia stood alone under the brilliant California stars, thinking about legends and sacrifice, about knowledge preserved through blood and passed down through trust. Tomorrow would bring new students, new challenges, new opportunities to prove worthy of the legacy Spectre Wing had died protecting. But tonight she simply stood in grateful silence, honoring the quiet ones who had earned the right to remain quiet, and remembering that sometimes the most extraordinary people look exactly like everyone else. The desert wind whispered across the flight line, carrying with it the promise that legends, once awakened, never truly sleep again. They just find new guardians worthy of carrying their light forward into an uncertain world. And in barracks across the base, young pilots lay awake thinking about impossible maneuvers, quiet legends, and the humbling realization that they had much more to learn than they'd ever imagined. The legacy of Spectre Wing lived on, carried forward by pilots who had learned that true respect is earned through competence, not conversation, and that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one everyone overlooks. Some legends are too important to remain stories, but the most important ones don't need fame to survive. They just need teachers willing to pass them on, and students humble enough to receive them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.